Okay, we're live.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Heathen Hour. I'm back. I know everybody missed me so much. I'm back to hosting again. So tonight we have Matt Powell joining us along with Jackson Wheat, and we're going to have a talk that may take many sort of winding roads, but essentially what we wanted to have a conversation about is kind of the intersection of theism and a belief or a subscription to evolutionary theory. So I'm going to give each of you an opportunity to just introduce yourselves to everybody who is watching right now. And I will start with you, Matt. So Matt, why don't you introduce yourself to everybody who's watching the stream?
All right, howdy, folks. My name is Matt Powell. I'm a young man, preacher, 22 years old. Nobody old or special by any means, but I'm a college student, and I love the Bible, I love science, and I love logic and so forth. And I love to study these sort of things. It intrigues me a lot. And where I'm coming from is I think evolution's a fraud. I think it's more of a religion than anything, and I think it's just kind of silly. That's just me. And I think that the Bible goes directly against evolution. I don't care what Hugh Ross or any of these guys say. I think the Bible contradicts evolution, whether Hugh Ross likes it or not. The only reason I mention this is because I was recently introduced to him. But I just love the Bible, and I don't want other college students to be deceived by the lies that are out there in the textbooks and so forth. And so one of the things that I like to do is get outspoken about that, because I was once deceived on the issue. And it's very easy to be deceived by lies. Hitler said if you can tell a lie big enough, loud enough, and often enough, people will eventually believe it. And he said, if you can let me control the textbooks, I'll control the state. And so I firmly believe that our textbooks are controlled and that there's a bunch of lies in them. And we could go through each one. I don't know where this debate or discussion or whatever you want to call it's going to go, but that's just a little bit about myself. And overall, I know they call me a hate preacher. I'm really a nice guy. I'm not as bad as the media makes me out to be. So there's my opening statement.
All right, well, thanks, Matt. And I think we have a clear vision of where Matt is standing on this particular issue. So next, I will allow Jackson Wheat to introduce himself. So go right ahead, Jackson.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jackson Wheat, and I am also a college student. I'm studying biology currently, and I aim to get my bachelor's degree in biology so I can go on eventually become an evolutionary biologist, because evolution is by no means a fraud. It is, in fact, very well understood in a lot of different ways, process that allows us to make testable predictions about the natural world, many predictions of which have been verified. And so I aim to show that to different people by making videos about it. I talk about the process of evolution, predictions made by evolution, various ways we can show that evolution is correct. So I have a whole playlist on evidence for evolution. And so, yes, I'm very interested to be in this discussion because I do love this subject. It's my favorite subject.
Well, we thank both of you for joining us. So I guess I will start by posing a question to Matt that Jackson, I think, might be able to elaborate on for you. So what is your main or primary objection to evolutionary theory? Is it solely because it contradicts with the Bible, or is it because you've had a look at it and you have questions that you feel can't be answered?
Yeah. Well, I think there's tons and tons of fallacies behind evolution. One common one would be carbon dating. It's common that somebody will kill something and then they'll carbon date it, and like a day later they'll carbon date this thing, and they carbon date it at like 1,800 years old. Sometimes it's like 6,000 years old, and but it's supposed to be reliable. And so just the fact that they say, well, carbon dating is the number one thing, not to mention, we're constantly making new discoveries. And I personally think the new discoveries actually point to design and point to a creator. And really it comes down to the existence of God, but I'm sure we'll get into that later. Obviously that's one of the main objections I have. Another objection is, science has to be demonstrable and testable and provable. Otherwise it's not science. Well, I don't know how somebody can actually determine what the rate of burn is with the sun. Like scientists say, hey, the sun's burning up 250 tons a second or whatever. Well, the thing is, there's no way we could even get close enough to make those measurements. There's no way we could make those measurements. So, we can't demonstrate it, we can't test it, and we certainly can't prove it. And so we do have to make assumptions about where the world came from. We do have to make predictions. And we have to look at the fossil record and things to be able to understand those predictions and be able to back them up by science. So those are just a couple of things that are against it, the evolutionists push out there. One of the things that I think totally shows evolution to be a fraud is the recent discovery that's been made that, dinosaur fossils have been dug up recently by some paleontologists, and they've noticed that the tissue is still soft and it hasn't fossilized yet. And,
Very Schweitzer.
Within just a minute, yeah. So basically, I mean, if something is 1 million years old, it's bound to fossilize. This stuff is not fossilized in any sense. And, another objection is, the fossil record. They'll say, well, we date the fossils based on the rock layers, but we're going to date the rock layers based on the fossils. And that's how we're going to date things, but it's circular reasoning. Those are just a few of the many objections that I have to evolution.
Okay, so I heard a lot of things in there. So some of them I recognize, particularly Dr. Mary Schweitzer's work.
Jackson's furrowed brow there.
Yes, that's right. So Jackson,
you look like you're having a good time.
Yeah.
Oh, I am, yes. I have,
where would you like to start?
I actually predicted all of those arguments, except for the soft tissue one. I didn't predict that one, but I actually know a little bit about that. So I'll get to that in due course. The carbon dating issue, first of all. And I've heard you make this one before, and so I actually wrote it down. I have my little notes with me here. So the way you describe the process of carbon dating these things, you say they died yesterday, and then we date them, or they die one day, we date them the next day, and then they date it to be 1,800 years old or whatever. Yes, that's going to happen, because that is a blatant misapplication of how carbon dating works. In carbon dating, you have to wait for something to be dead 100 years before you can get an accurate reading on it. There are many, many studies of carbon dating using standard deviation, and scientists understand, chemists and physicists understand the error bars within this method, as well as many other radiometric dating methods. And while none of those are actually evidence for evolution, they help us to date the past. And actually, so when there are errors like that, we understand them. There are a few little errors like that in the creationist literature, such as something died yesterday and we dated it to be 1,800 years old. There's another one where they say, oh, we dated a snail shell and it turned out to be 3,000 years old or whatever. And again, explainable because we understand the chemistry of the snail shell. We understand how carbon dating works. And so that is a blatant misapplication, ultimately, of carbon dating. So that argument really, really shouldn't be used. I haven't done any videos directly explaining how carbon dating works, but I have done ones talking about the reliability of it. But Wikipedia is a great resource if you want to read more about that, because they go into extreme detail on everything, right? So you could look at Wikipedia for that. You said the thing about... Oh, that's another thing. Carbon dating is actually very useful because we have a number of different methods by which we can verify that it works, aside from the fact that physicists and chemists have spent literally decades working out the concept of half-lives and all these other chemical properties and things like that would affect it. They spent decades working this stuff out. It is very reliable, and we can actually use it, and it has been used actually to date passages in the Bible. There was a movie that came out fairly recently called Fragments of Truth. Did you see it?
No, I haven't seen it.
So Fragments of Truth, it's narrated by John Rhys Davies. It was the guy who was the dwarf in Lord of the Rings. He was also in The Sliders, but that's another story.
I love that show.
Anyway, you like that show? Okay. So he was the old doctor in The Sliders. So the movie, in the movie they were talking about the reliability of the Bible and how we can trace back these passages through time to show that they actually haven't changed a whole lot. Now, regardless of whether or not that's actually true, the point is they use carbon dating as well as looking at the type of writing that was done in each of the different fragments. They can narrow the fragment down to a certain time period. They can say, oh, the writing on this fragment should be dated somewhere between 180 and 220 AD. Carbon dating tells us that this piece is between, somewhere between like 100 and 200 AD. That's when something like that. It's probably not that accurate, but it's around there. And so you can look at both of these things, and you can show, okay, they intersect in this area between 180 and 200 AD, and so we could say the earliest that this text is 180 AD, right? And actually, they talk about that in the movie, the usefulness of carbon dating in figuring out the ages of fragments of the Bible. So it is actually very useful. But again, it's not evidence for evolution. Right? It's just a method by which we date things. Evolution is ultimately a matter of population genetics. So if we want to talk about evidence for evolution, we have to talk about evidence from population genetics or paleontology, like you mentioned earlier, because that's another really great place we could go. You mentioned the sun was the next one, I think. You mentioned in your video "Evolution is a Fraud" that the sun, correct me if I'm wrong, some number of millions of years ago, the sun should have been large enough that it would have engulfed the Earth's orbit, right?
Absolutely, because most evolutionists say that, well, since there is no God, and since we can't have an eternal God, there has to be an eternal universe. And so if the sun is eternal, then obviously the sun would have at some point engulfed the universe.
No.
Unless you believe in the Big Bang, obviously you could go that route as well. But yeah.
Well, actually, so the thing is, I've never met or heard of any physicist who thinks our solar system is eternal. Right? Our solar system is, as near as I can tell, approximately 4.5 billion years old. Right?
Yeah.
But when you actually do the calculations, when you run them, as Vice Rhino did, for instance, in his video critique of your video, "Evolution is a Fraud," when you actually run the numbers, you find out, no, the sun has never been anywhere near large enough to have engulfed.
I don't mean to cut you off, but I have a question. So basically, how would you measure the rate of burn then? Because they say the sun is burning out at such and such amount per year. How could you possibly, because science has to be demonstrable, testable, and provable, how could you possibly determine what that rate of burn is?
So
I don't think it's possible.
So for one thing, it's not burning. I think burning is a bit misleading. The sun is fusing hydrogen to make helium, right? And then you use Einstein's equation equals mc squared to figure out how much energy is being released by the fusion of hydrogen, because it's this very teeny tiny amount of matter fused, and it gives you this gigantic amount of energy. So it's not really so much burning as it is fusing. And you said, so burning, and then what was the part after that? I lost my train of thought. After you said the burning, I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry.
Obviously paleontology. The paleontologists have found that there's.
I mean about the sun. Continuing on about the sun.
Okay.
I lost my train of thought. You said the sun was.
So how do you measure the rate of burn?
Oh, okay.
How much hydrogen it's getting rid of? How do you measure that?
Okay, so that's another. So that actually is that's an interesting question. I am not a cosmology person, but there are methods. There are telescopes, for instance, that we can use that show us what type of matter other stars and whatnot are made of. It's was it radio spectrometry? I think is the name of the field.
Yeah, but my question is, how long have we had telescopes for? And if the sun is burning at that, at that amount per year, we wouldn't have had enough time to be able to make this discovery that they claim to have made, in my humble opinion. So, I think it's a fraud to say, well, we know exactly how much the sun is burning up when we've only had the telescope for a few hundred years. We haven't had the telescope for that long.
I don't really understand what the objection is. It sounds like you're saying we shouldn't have made this discovery because.
Well, it's not that we didn't. Yeah, it's not that I'm saying we shouldn't have made a discovery. Obviously, I hope we make all the discoveries we can, because again, I think all the discoveries point back to design. But back to this, there's no way, just 200 years or however many hundred years that the telescope has been out for, there's no way that we'd have enough time within the amount of burn that they say there is to be able to measure that with telescopes. So that argument, I don't think is valid. I don't think it would hold water.
I'm not.
Yeah, I don't understand that objection. This seems
to be a very strange contention. And again, I'm not a cosmology person, but it seems that it's not extremely controversial within the physics community at how the sun is powered, right? is powered by hydrogen fusion, and you can ask many people this, and they will give you the same answer. And again, I think Wikipedia is a great source because they can take you directly to technical papers,
Sure.
and you can go to those technical papers and you can read the materials and methods and conclusions and whatnot, and you can read for yourself how they ran these experiments and how they got the conclusions. And the best part about science is, if with the proper training and with the proper tools, we can replicate these experiments. And so that's something you should be able to. That's something you should be able to do. Or you should be able to find, I think, relatively easily. I've never heard.
Here's the thing, though, man. Like, okay, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Did you want to finish? I was just gonna say I look at these arguments that they're making, and they're saying, well, we can measure the rate of burn in the sun, based off telescopes. I don't think that's possible.
So why?
Within just a huge, it's definitely not possible, because if the sun is burning up, you have to look at the mass of the sun, how big it is. The eye of the you have to take so many things into consideration. And even then, there's no way we could zoom in close enough, even with all the technology that we have, to look at the radius. To look at the radius of the sun, there's no way. And so, I really think the argument falls apart. I don't think it's a valid argument. I think it's crazy.
I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding. It's not about zooming in to look at the center of the sun to understand that it's with like a microscope or with some sort of telescope, so we can see the little hydrogen atoms fusing with each other. It's more about we can infer this is happening based on how we understand a hydrogen fusion. We understand how they can form to make helium, and we understand, like I said, Einstein's equation equals
I see what you're saying. Yeah,
and so we can make this inference based on what we do know without having to directly see it. Like, for example, we can't directly see electrons, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But we know electrons exist because we can utilize them all the time, like we're doing right now.
Sure. But in space, wouldn't it be a different scenario based on the fact that, the space and the air in the space is much different than the air we have here in our area. So, it's just, we have to take that into consideration. There's so many things you'd have to take into consideration, because we are not, if we went into space, we'd suffocate,
Are you suggesting that because things need oxygen to burn, and there's no air in space, obviously that's not occurring? Because I think what Jackson was trying to say, I am by no means somebody to explain this to anyone.
I'm not either.
So we'll get back on paleontology shortly, but I think that because it's a fusion, the oxygen that you're referencing isn't required for that activity to take place.
Right. There is no oxygen required. This is about the mass of the sun pulling these atoms together, which is causing them to fuse.
I can definitely see where you're coming from, but again, I think it comes. Yeah, I actually can see where you're coming from, but based on the observations that we make. However, when we talk about like design and so forth, and just creation itself, and just where everything began, I have a question, if that's all right. Is it okay if I ask you? Yeah, okay, awesome. So, just curious, how do you guys believe the universe began? Do you guys believe in the Big Bang Theory?
Well, see, again, I'm not a physicist, and so what I'm going with is generally the Oh, actually, is he still there?
I'm here.
Yeah.
Okay. I just saw the spinning wheel of death. Right. And
it's all right.
Well, I go with what the consensus of physicists and cosmologists is generally saying, and I go with this because I understand. Because, well, for one thing, I don't think there's any conspiracy, any multidisciplinary conspiracy, because I've actually worked with evolutionary biologists. I used to work at the Department of Mammalogy at LSU, and so I as far as I'm aware, unless it was all going on behind my back, there's no multidisciplinary conspiracy among scientists to try to.
I agree with you on that point. I don't think there's a conspiracy among the scientists themselves. But here's the thing: they say 97% of academia believe in evolution, right? Well, here's the thing.
But I would say. Yeah. Definitely among biologists, and probably I'll agree with you for the sake of argument.
Sure. So basically 97% say they agree with the theory of evolution. But here's the thing: in order to work for our public school system, and in order to work for the colleges around, you have to sign a waiver stating that you will teach evolution whether you agree with it or not. And those same waivers are the waivers that they use to judge who believes in evolution and who doesn't. So I've talked to tons of college professors that say, hey, I don't believe in evolution, but hey, I had no choice but to sign the waiver or I'm out of a job.
Do you have...
So, and two, that's appealing to authority. I think as the people, we should be able to do the research on our own and take a look at methods on our own and take a look at the scientific methods that they're using and make sure that they're verifiable, because science has to be demonstrable, testable, and provable. And when it comes to the Big Bang, that is not demonstrable in any sense. It's not even testable. And so how can you prove it? How could you call it science?
Well,
I think it's in the realm of religion. I think it's a religion, personally.
Well, you're entitled to your beliefs. I'm very interested to know about that that waiver and this almost extortion, it seems, to get people to teach evolution, because it almost seems like what I'm aware of among teachers is, yes, if you're a science teacher, specifically a biology teacher, then it's your job to teach the science that we understand. And so evolution falls into that category. However,
but the thing is, it comes down to the textbooks. It comes down to what the textbooks say, and the textbooks come from an elite group, and it just happens to go out to all the United States. So that they say, hey, teacher, you either teach this or hit the road, and you have to sign that waiver. And those are the same waivers they take to say, oh, see, 97% of people believe in evolution.
So,
but you talk to those people, they probably, half of them don't.
Okay, well,
I've talked to teachers.
I think there's a bit of confusion here. For instance, let's say I want to become an English teacher, and I have to sign a waiver saying, yes, I'm going to teach English language, grammar, vocabulary, etc., and, the Epic of Gilgamesh, whatever. If I sign up to teach this class, and then I tell them, okay, kids, we're going to learn differential calculus, I'm probably going to lose my job, and for good reason. I'm not teaching them the subject that I told them I would. I've never heard of... I'm not
sure, but if I see the argument. Yeah. So basically,
what is this waiver you're referring to?
Godless Ivan
sure. So it's
sent a super chat, and he's just asking, "Can you produce the waiver?"
Yes, I would.
Yeah, or direct us to it. I can look it up.
Anybody? Yeah, look it up online. Look up. How do we? Just type in, how do we base which scientists believe in evolution and which scientists don't?
Well,
and they will say, hey, you have to sign a waiver. And here's the thing. I've talked to tons of these guys. They say, look, I disbelieve in evolution. I have no choice but to teach it, otherwise I'll lose my job. It really comes down to the agenda of the government.
Can I stop for 1 second, because I'm confused, because you said, how do we base which scientists believe in evolution and which scientists don't? But you're saying that teachers in public schools who aren't scientists are the ones who are signing this waiver.
When I say public schools, I'm saying, hey, all the colleges.
So you're talking about universities and colleges.
Absolutely. And also, the other schools that are around that are just regular high schools and so forth. I believe they do take some of the polls out of there, and I'm pretty sure you can verify that as well.
Generally, when you look up studies on scientists that accept evolution, there is no mention of any sort of waiver. I've never heard of this waiver, and I don't think anyone else on this panel has either, it seems. Have you ever heard of Project Steve, for instance?
I can't say that I have.
Project Steve was a little thing where every scientist in biology whose name is Steve or a derivative of Steve, Stephanie, Stephen, Esteban, whatever, signed to show that they understand and accept evolution. This got thousands of signatures, just scientists in the field of biology whose names are derivative of Steve, right? There's no waiver involved there, for instance.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Even still, would it be possible for you to, say, produce a list of names of the many, many scientists you've talked to who say they're forced to teach evolution, but they don't agree with it?
Well, growing up, I don't have a full list. I could get you a list if you'd like. But, growing up, whenever I'd go to these, dinosaur places where they talk about the ancient dinosaurs and, the prehistoric age and so forth, all these, just about every scientist. My dad is a creation science guy. evangelist, and he goes, and we talk to these guys, and they're like, yeah, I mean, evolution is definitely a fraud. I mean, growing up from 5 years of age to now I'm 22, and I still go to these places. And you know what? Any of the viewers can go to these places and legitimately ask these guys, pull them aside, say, hey, do you really honestly believe in this? And obviously, you know, it is appealing to authority, so in a sense, it is a logical fallacy. Obviously, as people, you know, as the people of America and of the world, we need to do this research for ourselves. But I think that the research just, again, I would say it points to design. It points to God. I believe it points to the God of the Bible. There's a reason why, you know, the Bible obviously mentioned dinosaurs before we even made the discoveries of the fossils. You know, the Bible mentions dinosaurs. But anyways, that's a whole other deal.
Yeah, that's
I know you guys want to stay on topic.
We don't need to go down at this very moment.
Duke asked if you're a fan of Jack Chick, Matt. I don't know who Jack Chick is.
I am not.
Okay.
Jack Chick is a heretic. Okay. I'm not for him.
So if you had to narrow down your argument against evolution, Matt, what would it be? Like, what would be the one thing that you would say to Jackson that this is the reason why I think evolution is fake?
Yeah, I think what puts the nail in the coffin is the fact that we've made recent discoveries, such as with the dinosaur fossils, and in these fossils still contains gelatin and tissue that is not fossilized, which means that this would have had to die recent in history. And any scientist, I don't care who it is, and I'm not trying to appeal to authority, but I'm saying, look, any scientist, if we want to base it off what scientists say, will say, hey, this had to have been recent history. You know, if there's no other logical explanation than that the fact that this had to have been recent in history that these dinosaurs have passed on. And so it's a fact. I mean, that's one of the many things that honestly, I don't know how you're going to get around it. I'm looking forward to seeing your answer, and I'm not trying to be cocky in any way. You seem like a really good guy, and you know, you seem like a really nice fellow. So, anyways, I'd like to see how you're going to get around it, though.
Okay, so my first point is that no, it's not a fact that these things died recently. In fact, none of the researchers, none of the paleontologists who have dealt with these fossils, with any of the fossils containing these microns of soft tissue, because I think that's something that's often misunderstood, is people think, oh, they found like a a full leg, a full T-Rex leg, or something like that. No. Yeah. They found bones with these.
Sure, some of it's fossilized. Sure, I agree. Some of it is fossilized.
Oh, I wasn't going to go down that area. What I was going to talk about is they find these tiny microns of soft tissue. Yes, that is not. It's not permineralized like fossils usually are. And when you start to read their research, have you read research like by Mary Schweitzer, for instance, on the Tyrannosaur femur that had soft tissue in it?
I can't say that I have. No, I don't do a ton of that kind of stuff. I'll be honest, and I know the viewers are going to hate me for this, but I don't do a ton. I do a little bit of secular research. I look at what the secular people say. I actually enjoy looking at both sides, but I spend more time listening to people like Kent Hovind. I don't really listen to Kent Hovind, but I think Kent Hovind's a great guy.
I figured you listened to Kent Hovind based on a few of your arguments. But that also actually, there's another quote Shannon, are you saying something?
Shannon, are you all right?
Am I muted? I'm sorry. Just for the record, Dr. Mary Schweitzer is a devout Christian.
Yes.
We've spoken to her. She is a devout Christian, and will profess that to anyone she speaks to, and sees no contradiction between her paleontology work and the soft tissue that she found and her Christianity. Right. She, if anything, she sees it as, a more glorious representation of how God is allowing things to unfold in the universe.
Right. And
I just wanted to interject with that because you said secular, and I was like, no, Mary's a Christian.
Well, I don't know these people. Yeah, obviously some Christians I haven't even heard of. So that's the first. God bless her. And
actually, there's actually
a soft tissue.
There's a secular source that I would like to return to later because I found out some very interesting information on it. And so yes, the soft tissue. So actually, when you should read her research. It's very intriguing. Sure. What you'll find is that these teeny tiny bits of soft tissue are found when they are preserved in basically areas where they're not exposed to like open air. They're not exposed to microbes. And so when they're in these tiny pockets where, temperature's not affecting them or soil acidity or anything like that, the question basically becomes, why should we expect them to break down?
Okay, I have an objection.
And actually, there's been research into iron as having been a preservative of the soft tissues, of these tiny amounts of soft tissue. So not only is there research into how they were preserved, there's no reason to suspect, coming from any of the paleontologists who pioneered the work on dinosaur soft tissue, suggesting that the Earth is less than 6,000 years old, because not only would that interfere with what we know in just of dinosaurs, that would cause simultaneous major issues in numerous other fields, and we may or may not talk about that. But can
I make an objection to the first thing that you said about the fact that, and the thing is, I agree. If air is not, if something is not exposed to air at all, obviously it's just gonna remain in the state it's in. If there is zero exposure, I totally agree on that. But here's the thing: land. I mean, we say that, oh yeah, the dinosaurs, they died out millions and millions of years ago. But here's the thing: if that's true, the landmass is constantly changing due to all the floods that we have, due to all the, all the great stuff. They say the Great Canyon was caused by, water raining on the rocks from lake. All these floods, and even just a local flood. The Earth, at some point, had to have been hit by a tornado. I mean, just at a point. So you take enough time, you have millions and millions of years, at some point that stuff would have become exposed. And that's a fact. I mean, there's no getting around. Just based on the flood itself, too. The flood, and you don't even have to say it's a worldwide flood coming from your point of view. You could say it's a local flood. Just local flood here, local flood here. But yeah, I mean, the fossils that they've dug up were not actually in an area that was completely covered with sediment. This was an area that was not completely airtight. And it's a fact. I don't know why scientists and why certain people just want to put it to the side. And I'm not saying you're one of them, because you seem like an honest guy, but there's a lot of people that just don't want to talk about those arguments. And I know of scientists, evolutionists, that reject evolution's Achilles heel. A great documentary debunking evolution came out recently.
Okay. I'm going to basically brush aside a lot of what was said, and going to stick to the topic that was on the preservation of these soft tissues. So you understand that fossilization requires rapid burial, right?
Yes.
That's how. So are you aware, for instance, preserved like the mummified mammoths in Siberia, things like that?
I can't say I'm too familiar with it now.
Okay, researchers in Siberia have discovered mammoths, mostly baby ones, that were preserved in the ice for many thousands of years, longer than the Earth, is old. It's only 6,000 to 10,000 years old, and they were not disturbed by weather of any sort. They were, frozen, and then eventually these researchers came upon it, whether through thawing years later or what have you. So if something is buried quickly, it's not necessarily going to be disturbed. The fossils aren't necessarily going to be disturbed, and in fact, that's the major thing about fossilization, is that it's rapid burial, and then while the land around it may be disturbed, these things have to, a lot of times permineralization happens, which is where the minerals in the fossil are traded with the minerals in the soil. They trade out, and so the fossils basically become rock, or they become rock. Sure. The bone that was there is no longer there. And so you keep saying it's a fact, it's a fact, it's a fact. These things aren't facts. Or the arguments you're proposing aren't facts. Because you kind of throw them out there, you kind of lay them out there, and you just say it's a fact. Well,
I mean, let the viewer look it up for themselves.
I completely agree.
Let them pull a computer off their shelf, or go to their desktop, get in their office, and look it up. And they'll be able to see the facts. And they ultimately, I think it comes down to the fact that some people want to believe in evolution, and they don't want to believe in God. And I believe that evolution is an atheist's Bible. I believe it's the only thing they have, because if you don't have billions and billions of years, if you, let's say, for example, my worldview is true about God creating the world in 6 days, all of a sudden, how did we get here? Because all of a sudden, it's like, well, something super. Almost every atheist I've talked to has said, well, obviously, if the Earth is 6,000 years old, maybe it could have been aliens. Something would have had to put us here. But obviously, if the Earth is millions of years old, obviously, a lot of times the human brain can't comprehend back that far, and they think, well, there was just nothing, and that's what everybody says. Oh, before the Big Bang, there was nothing.
That's kind of irrelevant to our discussion, wouldn't you say? Because we're talking about evolution, and the Big Bang cosmology has nothing to do with population genetics.
I have to say this. On the Non Sequitur show, when I was on there, they were jumping all over the place, so I was going with them. So that's usually what I'm used to.
Okay. So we're more focused.
I'll try to stay on topic. I apologize. Let's get back to the topic at hand. Sorry
how do you explain, Matt, all the millions of Christians that do believe in evolution? Like, if it's an atheist lie, are all those Christians just tricked by the atheists that are preaching evolution?
Well, again, I think a lot of times people appeal to authority, and I think a lot of people are very sincere, but I think they can be sincerely wrong. And, I'm a sincere person. Could I be wrong on certain things? Sure, but there are certain things that are just so blatantly straightforward. And, when you got guys like Hugh Ross getting their glasses on and, making themselves look like they're just so intelligent and going up in front of all these people and saying, hey, the Earth's billions of years old, but I believe in God. Obviously, with the way society works today, some Christians are going to believe in evolution, and I can't help that. All I do is just recommend that they study these things for themselves and get on the internet. Atheists tell me all the time, oh, yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, can I interject with one thing for 1 sec? This is the point I was going to bring up, and the Godless Iowan just made a super chat too. That goes the opposite way. Like, for example, I was a very devout theist who like you, would have brushed off evolution without looking into it, and as are many of the other atheists I know and Christians I know. But the thing is, once they looked into the secular sources, we went from being like you and saying, there is no other way, that this is it, this is what God says, this is what I believe, to either having to reconcile ourselves with it because we saw, the astronomical amount of facts and research and the multiple disciplines that confirm the efficacy of evolution, and we had to find a way to reconcile or abandon our faith. That's the one component of it. So, I mean, it's not... I don't think it's just a matter of us digging our heels in and saying we need to believe this, because if we don't believe this, that means that God is real and we don't want to believe in God. So, that's not the way that we look at things. I think that might be a misnomer. I think it has more to do with us being having evidence and information produced that we looked into, and not being able to turn our noses up at it anymore because we realized, hey, this has merit. Yeah. What are we going to do about that?
I actually can see where you're coming from, but again, I feel like a lot of things, I study secular resources too, but the thing is, a lot of times they miss so much. Like when they say, well, who created God or something? It's like, I'm like, really? God is outside of time. If he's not outside of time, if he's not outside of what's designed, then he's not God. And he's the uncaused cause. He's the first cause. There's so many abundant arguments against the evolution, and not only that, just against atheism itself. When I was a little kid at church, atheist friends, and I considered myself to be atheistic, but when I actually researched it, I went the completely other way. And I understand I was young, and people are like, "Oh, you're crazy," but you know what? It's the truth. And the reason I actually come on and talk to people like you guys is because I care for you. And I don't want you guys to die and go to hell. Like, I legitimately care. I pray that you guys find Christ and and get saved and just trust in the Master. But that's probably not going to happen. But my hopes are high.
We will definitely
probably not. Jackson had his hand up.
Yeah. Just before Jackson talks, sorry, Jackson. I just wanted to know. So Duke is asking what denomination are you from in Christianity?
So I'm an independent Baptist.
Okay.
I grew up as an independent Baptist.
All right. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead, Jackson. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
There are two things essentially I want to get to in this discussion. I don't know how long you guys want it to go, first of all.
Is there a way, Shannon? Is there a way we could go to like maybe 9:45, which is 35 more minutes? Is that fine, or do you guys want to go longer? I'll leave it up to you guys.
I'm not in charge here.
I didn't know.
Yeah, we usually go
like,
till 9:30 or so. Yeah. So. 20,
Okay, sounds good.
30 minutes.
So that's 8:30 in real time. All right.
Sounds good.
So there are two things essentially that I want to cover. First of all, and this one is I think more important. You mentioned secular sources repeatedly throughout this conversation. You talked about having studied secular sources and whatnot. Well, one of the secular sources that you put out, or that you mentioned in the video, there's a video that you did where you talked to Steve and Kyle and others, and then you made a video kind of taking, the arguments that you made, and then you put up some quotes, about evolutionists who are, against evolution, or who recognize the faults in evolution, things like that, right?
That's true, yeah.
So one of the quotes you put up, and I can quote this directly because I have it right here.
Philosopher.
No, paleontologist.
Oh, okay.
It's Robert L. Carroll said, you have a quote where he says, quote, "We have no intermediate fossils between fish and amphibians," close quote, and you claimed that came from his book, his textbook, Vertebrate Paleontology and Evolution, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, that quote doesn't exist. Because you can find the book, that Vertebrate Paleontology and Evolution, online as a free PDF.
Maybe, okay.
It doesn't exist.
That's weird, because I actually got the quote from a website.
Yeah.
Because there's so many out there. Maybe, okay, and I'll give the viewers this. I'll give you this. Maybe I should have done a little more research on that specific one, but the other guys, obviously,
So that quote seems to have originated with the creationist Henry Morris. You're familiar with him?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that quote I say originated. Either he was the one who created the quote, or he nicked it from somebody else who was, who was maybe got it from someone else, or maybe made it up for themselves.
Right.
So right. I agree that they're because not only does he talk about in that book numerous transitions between fish and tetrapods, and I went through the book, Eusthenopteron, Osteolepis, Acanthostega, Nyctiostega. That was just that was just when he wrote that book, which was in 1988. Since then, we have recovered numerous more transitions, including one that was actually predicted by paleontologists on the idea that if evolution is correct, we should be able to predict certain fossils, and they did. They made a prediction based on evolution, and they found precisely what they predicted. Would you consider that important? Would you consider that's...
Well, I think it's very important, but the thing is, it depends on who's interpreting it, what lens they're using, because really, if you come down to it, it comes down to whether or not you're going to view things through an evolutionist lens or a creationist lens. You're either going to say, okay, I'm approaching this from the fact that I believe that the universe is 6,000 years old or 6.2 billion years old. It depends on which lens you have on.
Go ahead, interject for 1 sec. I'm so sorry, Jackson. You're both doing a great job, and I'm really enjoying this conversation. But just to speak to Jackson's point and what you just said there, Matt. So you said you used the quote that you found from a creationist resource. So that's, to my mind, I don't know what the resource was, but that's, to my mind, some evidence that they're willfully misrepresenting the science.
Yeah. Okay.
Isn't that a bit of that's a kind of a red flag, isn't it?
I'm going to agree with you. Actually, there's actually, and I'm not agreeing on that because I don't know the whole situation. I just grabbed it, and it wasn't necessarily from a creationist website. Believe it or not, I go to more secular websites to grab secular information like that.
So you think a secularist website misrepresented
I'm pretty sure. I will say this. There are certain creationists that are dishonest. I do believe that. But there also are many evolutionists, I believe, on the same token. I believe that we're all flesh, that we've all sinned and fallen short of God's glory, and that we all need a Savior. And so, that's kind of where I'm coming from, is the fact that, we're fallible, we're just mankind, and that's, so yeah.
What are those secular sources that you're using?
What's that?
What are a few of those secular sources you're using?
So I'd have to get online. I know, Dead State, I think, is one, if I remember correctly.
Dead State?
Pathos or something like that. I can't remember all of them. Because there's a guy on Pathos that's been coming after me lately. I think his name is like Hement or something.
Hement Meta.
Yeah, like that guy. I will give him this. He's a friendly man, though. He's a friendly man.
He is the friendly atheist.
He is. Yeah.
He is indeed.
Yeah. But anyways.
What was the first one you said? You say Dead State?
Yeah, I haven't heard of that.
I don't remember all the sources. I'd have to look them up and actually just send them to you guys. And if you guys want, after this podcast, I can send them to you.
Absolutely.
And then what we can do is you guys can update it in the video and say, hey, these are the sources that Matt's using. And
yeah, I would encourage, if you want to do research on evolution, you should go to something like Science Magazine or PNAS or NCBI or insert acronym here.
Even BioLogos has some good stuff.
BioLogos, yes, absolutely.
BioLogos has some great stuff.
They have terrific information. Sure. Yes, absolutely.
And they're a non-secular source. They're a very, very Christian.
Right.
Yeah. But if you really want to understand what the paleontologists and biologists themselves are saying, you should read their technical work. You shouldn't read a redacted version on someone's blog, which is what a lot of us do, because because a lot of times the jargon is so unwieldy in technical papers that you look at it and people are just like, well, like, no, I'm not gonna read that. It's ridiculous, and of course it's happened to me as well. Right. But the thing that I do in my videos, because I make videos about evolution, so every technical source that I use, that I read for my video, I include in the description, so you can for yourself go to that technical source and see if I'm telling the truth about what it says. And I think that is incredibly important. And I love PBS Eons. They also do that. You can open the description on their video, and they've got a list of 20 or so papers, and you can look at each one. Most of them are technical sources, and you can see, okay, there's this paper on this animal they mentioned. Here's another paper, and you can just go through and read them for yourself. And that's a really good way to do research on scientific topics, because a lot of times, if there's a paper that is controversial, other scientists will comment on it with their own set of technical papers, and then you can watch the back and forth. For example, the new dinosaur phylogeny. I don't know if you heard, but last year, Barron et al. Posted or did a paper where they showed that they believe there's reasonable evidence that there should be this new dinosaur family tree called the Ornithocellular hypothesis, rather than the age-old dinosaur dichotomy between Saurischia and Ornithischia. And so Barron et al., their conclusions were looked at by another famous paleontologist, Horner, maybe, I think. RG's probably pulling out his hairs in the chat right now because I can't remember.
Probably. The chat's a little unruly right now anyway, to be perfectly honest.
Unruly? I'm not looking at it. What is...
Yeah, I've got to bring up something from the chat whenever you're done.
Oh, okay. And so you've got Horner, we're just going to say tentatively, wrote a reply talking about, hey, what about these pieces of evidence? Did you guys consider these in your hypothesis? And then Barron et al. Wrote back saying, hey, yeah, we considered these. We also looked at this and this and this. And so, like I said, you can look at their materials and methods, their abstract, conclusion, all these different things. You can look at how they lay out these experiments and things to figure out all the stuff about reality. And so it's really great, and that is the best place to go.
I'm actually with you on that, but here's the thing. It's tough because there's certain scientists, like almost all scientists that believe in evolution, agree that the universe came into existence, it was tinier than a little dot on a piece of paper, right? And then it exploded, it was spinning and exploded. And, you have to look at the conservation of angular momentum.
Irrelevant, wouldn't you say?
Well, I would say that it's just one example.
Which is a matter of population genetics, so how the universe came into existence is pretty irrelevant to this conversation.
Yeah. Right, but I'm saying if you use the same scientists and apply their arguments in other areas, apply the argumentation style that they use, I think it falls apart in other areas, and I think the Big Bang is a perfect example. I don't know if we'll get into that.
I'm not sure we'll have time.
I wouldn't do that because I don't know much of anything about cosmology, and so I wouldn't I wouldn't, I wouldn't try to put myself out there as an expert on this topic when clearly I am not.
Is there a way we could?
Big Bang.
I'm sorry. Yeah, is there a way we could talk about God and just the existence of a creator? And I guess
we can in a second, Matt.
Okay.
Actually, that's okay, and I'm more than willing to go into that with you. But the chat just wanted to bring something up. They said that initially they heard you say that you don't use secular sources, and then they heard you say that you do use secular sources, and they felt as though it was a little bit of a waffling back and forth. So they just wanted some clarification on whether or not you do use secular sources, or you don't, or you use both.
So I agree. Yeah, so a little quick.
It was a contradiction. Maybe you misspoke. I'm not
sure. Yeah. So sure, no problem. Yeah, basically when I do my research, when I look at things that I would consider to be factual, I look at creation scientists. I look at what they say. I look at it through their lens, obviously, because I believe it matches up with the Bible. I believe the Bible. But as for the other secular sources, whenever I'm in a debate or a discussion, what I do is I look at the secular sources and I examine them inside and out, upside down, left and right. I examine every little, probably more than I examine the creation arguments, because I want to know both sides very, very well. But when it comes down to my own personal study, I really could care less what some scientist says about the Big Bang that is not demonstratable, testable, and provable. That's where I'm coming from.
Jackson, you may speak.
Yes, thank you, teacher. I agree.
Sign a waiver first.
Very. Oh, there we go. That's a great idea. Matt, that is great. And that should be done. And I actually have videos where I look at creationist technical articles and pick them apart. For instance, I did a video, my video, The Source Methods Approach. One of the things I do is I look at a conclusion that this paper, Georgia Purdom and a couple others wrote a paper where they're talking about how do we determine what a kind is, and we're not going to go down that rabbit hole.
That's a rabbit hole.
I'm just mentioning it. But one of the things, they mention a paper, they mention reaction to a paper that Todd Wood wrote back in 2010, where he determined that Australopithecus sediba, Homo habilis, Homo rudolfensis are all, along with us, of course, part of the human kind, right? Well, all these different species are part of the human kind, right? So she mentioned that paper, she put it out there, and she said, here are some creation scientists that disagree with that. And she mentioned Minton and a few others. Well, when I looked into each of these articles, because I went through all 4 of the articles that disagreed with Wood's paper that Purdom mentioned, 2 of them totally neglected any post-cranial anatomy for Australopithecus sediba, we'll just call A. sediba. The 3rd one ignored all of the similarities we share with A. sediba, and the 4th paper disagreed with the method that Todd Wood used, which is this actually fairly normal method in biology to figure out relationships. And actually, I have the Answers in Genesis Answers book, from which they wrote in 2006. And in there's a chapter by A.J. Monty White titled Hasn't Evolution Been Proven True? And there he says Homo habilis, which was mentioned by Todd Wood, isn't even a species. So what this shows me when I'm reading their papers and I'm looking at the different conclusions they draw is they're not even drawing anywhere near the same conclusion. They're not even on the same playing field as each other. It's basically throwing darts in the dark. I mean, 3 of these guys are okay with, using this method that Todd used, but they disagree with his conclusion. One guy thought the method was bad. Another guy doesn't even think one of these species is real. So these are just conclusions that they're so discordant. You probably wouldn't see this sort of thing in the scientific community, just because of they don't use the same method as scientists. They're not looking at this data like A. sediba the same way that your average paleoanthropologist is going to, because the average paleoanthropologist is going to look at the differences that there are between A. sediba and us, and yes, there are some, as Menton correctly pointed out. but there are also a lot of similarities that we share, and we would expect that there would be similarities because they're very closely related to us. And so the point is that we use science. When the scientific community uses science, what they're coming up with, it makes more sense, and it's a much more consistent method than what the creationists are using to determine what is true. And so that is of fundamental importance, I think, to understand when you're looking at creationist works.
Sure. Well, I would say that, and I would humbly submit that there's obviously secular evolutionists, ones that don't even believe in God at all, that will still say, hey, we disagree on this, or we disagree on this application of this over here. I mean, there are disagreements within their realm as well. And again, I think it's the appeal to authority.
I would agree that there are definitely, people who disagree. For instance, there's Alan Fiducia, who thinks birds aren't dinosaurs. Right? He's an extremely tiny minority, but he disagrees with the main consensus nonetheless. So I would definitely agree with that when you say that. But it's not the same level of disagreement over these sorts of things among evolutionary biologists as there are with creationists. Creationists, it seems more when you read their works, they're just kind of determining, hey, I want this to be true, I don't want this to be true, and what they want to be true isn't necessarily concordant with what the other creationists, even in their own circles, want to be true. Yeah.
Some people are very biased. I agree.
Definitely, I would agree with that. Yeah. So, but my final question, I guess, and I know you said you wanted to talk also about the existence of God. I guess my final question is, you made a video, Evolution is a Fraud, and you clearly believe that evolution is a fraud. So I just have to ask, can you give me a summary of how evolution works?
So basically, there's variations within kinds. And I know that's a big rabbit hole. And I don't know if we have time to go down it, but I will say this, that, obviously I believe in variations within kinds, but I do believe those variations are very limited. And, some evolutionists say, well, maybe a reptile laid an egg and a bird hatched out or something. I've heard silly stuff like that. I have. I am not joking. Evolution happened so fast that this happened. The thing is, all the same kind. If you have a dog, it's only going to produce a dog kind. I think there's limits to the variations, and it depends on how much time you have. If we had billions and billions of years, we'd probably be human, but we'd probably look a little bit different. And so really it comes down to that. And also, it just comes down to the Word of God, whether you're an evolutionist or a creationist or whatever. I think that all the glory should go to God for His creation. I think it's very, very clear that this universe was designed by God. And so I know that's jumping off topic, but
the first part was fine. So you accept and understand that there are variations within members of a population, right? You said that part, right? Yeah. So, and then there's a mechanism of evolution like natural or sexual selection or genetic drift or gene flow, and gene flow kind of, in its own way. So there's a mechanism of evolution that occurs, and then you can get speciation after generations, right? You accept all of these?
Absolutely, I accept all that, yeah.
Okay, so do you accept that there are mutations?
I wouldn't say mutations. I would say variations in the sense of, obviously, if something is in a hot environment, obviously it's going to adapt to that environment. If something is like in Antarctica, polar bears are going to adopt to that. It depends on the environment they're in, and the adoptions that take place happen very quickly. It's like almost third generation. Boom, they adapt to this stuff. Depending on what it is. Obviously, maybe there's other arguments there, but from the research that I've done, it's been pretty clear. But
so
this is a rabbit hole, though. This is a huge rabbit hole. Well, are you sure you don't want to just jump to the existence of God? Because I think that's probably the most important.
My thinking was that this is actually something I've been wanting to ask for a while, but we kept diverting and going other ways, and it was just something I wanted to ask because you believe that evolution is a fraud, and so I just want to make sure that we understand how the evolutionary process works, so that what I think of when I say evolution is the same as what you think of when you say evolution.
Okay. Actually, I know where you're going with this. I believe in microevolution. I just don't believe in like the macroevolution.
So if you accept that speciation happens, you therefore believe in macroevolution. Because the definition of macroevolution is genetic change at or above the level of species.
Yeah, but there's a limit to the variation within the kinds.
What limit?
That's where I would say there's, well, obviously, something's not going to become as huge as Texas or something. If you have like an animal, it's not going to get as big as there's a limit there.
Do you know why?
And well, because of DNA and because of the way things work. In that case, that's because of physics. Because if something is that large, it's basically not going to be able to move, especially on our planet. So you'd agree there are limits to the variations, right?
In the sense that there are anatomical constraints that conform to the laws of physics, absolutely. But one of the things I was going for was that, and yes, I would call them mutations, because when there is an error in the code, whether the genetic code, whether that be harmful or neutral or beneficial, that is a mutation. When you substitute guanine when you substitute guanine for thymine or something like that, that is a mutation. There's an error in the code, and so would you say you accept that there are mutations that have added structures or functions to organisms?
I would say that they're limited, but I would say that yes, there are. And it depends on your definition of what a mutation is. If you mean like obviously they adapt, right? If you're saying just they adapt, I know I've heard some really crazy stuff like a mutation, like a dinosaur it lays an egg and a bird hatches out or something. When you say it depends on your definition, that's why I think definition is everything. But obviously yes, there are limits to the variations.
So
obviously,
what limit?
I mean, if you had, let's say for example, yeah.
I was just wondering what the limit is.
Right. Yeah,
well,
because that's no creationist is. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, you say definitions are important, so you have to define what limits it.
Right.
Sure. So let's say, for example, like I wanted to start like a car factory or something. How long? I mean, let's say your job was to search for defects in this car. How long would it be before this car turns into an airplane?
That's not a good analogy. That's not a good analogy.
It absolutely is, because there's a limit to the variation.
Do you want to know why it's not a good analogy? So it's not a good analogy because, well, first I have to ask, do cars reproduce? Do mama cars and daddy cars produce baby cars?
No, but the thing is, when we look at variations, why
are there variations?
Well, I mean, it's very simple. I mean, if there's a defect in a car, and there's going to be, and it needs to adapt to something, I mean, obviously, there's going to be a variation by the designers, by the people. So it comes down to that.
So when organisms have variations, do you know why they have variations? Why we all look different?
To adapt to their surroundings.
Not necessarily. We all look different because we have, alleles, right? We have versions of genes, and these versions are very different. There are millions and millions of different alleles, probably billions, and they're different. Yes, the alleles are what cause the variation, because you get a sperm and an egg, and you get a certain set of alleles, and that creates offspring.
And so you would agree, just curious, I know you're going somewhere, but you'd agree that it's coded. DNA is code if you blow it up, right? That it has its own code. That it has its own code.
In a colloquial sense, I mean, you can use it like an analogy, like DNA is analogous to a code because it has to be read by an enzyme, and then that produces RNA, which goes out, creates a protein, whatever. So you can say it's analogous to a code, I would think.
Yeah. I didn't mean to cut you off, though. I mean, by all means, I know you're going somewhere with that argument.
But the point is, but like they said, can you provide us with what the limits are? Because I've read creationist literature. I've read a bit of it, and they have never ever been able to produce the limit. They've never done a study that says this right here is the limit. They can never, mutate past this point or vary past this point or whatever.
Well, okay, so the fossil record, I think the fossil record is a perfect example of how these variations, obviously variations have happened, but when an evolutionist talks about variations, obviously they say, hey, it can go way beyond what the genetics tell it to do. There's only a certain amount of key things that certain genetics can tell something to do.
What?
And so, I mean, it's not unlimited possibility. Obviously,
no, I would agree
you keep
with
saying
that.
limit, but I just don't understand what the limit is. I'm just like
Okay,
the limit just isn't
right.
clear.
For instance,
Okay.
I mean, like they say, a fish could never evolve into a tetrapod, right? They say that could never happen because there are limits to the variation within kinds. But then they have always been unable to produce what exactly that limit is, where it
Well,
starts.
if we look at the fossil record, it's very clear that, I mean, we
Oh, we
never
can look at the
see
fossil record,
mutations. We never see mutations, and I know that's a whole another thing, but I don't personally believe we ever see mutations from one kind slowly evolving. Neanderthal man and up to Cro-Magnon man, and Neanderthal and all this, and then all of a sudden we
didn't evolve from Neanderthals. Cro-Magnon was
I don't even.
It was just early humans.
So I don't even know all the art, but I mean, I just think it's ridiculous. But really, I think it comes down to God, man. And it just comes down to God.
Well, quickly I can explain why it's not ridiculous, and then I guess we can move on to God if you want, because I know you've been wanting to do that. And I've been taking up our time, and I also don't know how long we've gone. But here's why it's not ridiculous. There are, and I actually have a video titled "New Kinds," where I look at just the evolution of fish, just fish, and I look at a very tiny sampling of the available fossils and genetics work that has been done on fish, and what they show is, I have to go soon. Is
All
that
right, so we're probably wrap it up.
okay? Is that there is unequivocal transition among these different organisms, and I make videos about it. There's lots of literature. In fact, the book you cited, Paleontology and Evolution, or Vertebrate Paleontology and Evolution, is a great resource for that. So, anyways, what do you want to ask me about God? Because I know you've been asking about that.
Sure. Well, I guess my question is why. I mean, obviously, do you believe there's an on-cause? Do you believe there's a first cause? Do you believe the universe is eternal, or do you believe there's a first cause? I guess would be my first question.
Do I believe it? I mean, I don't think the universe is eternal. What I think about, I don't think very often about the age of the universe, but my understanding of the universe can be boiled down to, this is what I've read from different sources.
How do you think everything started? Just curious.
I have no idea.
Something would have had to wound up things. I mean, the sun is burning down, the Earth is slowing down, the rotation is slowing down, the moon's getting farther away, so something would have had to wound everything up. And perfectly, obviously, if we change gravity from just 1/10 to the 40, nothing would exist. And that's a scientific
If we changed it from what?
1/10 to the 40, the gravitational pull, in the universe, nothing would exist. And I think that there is no other logical possibility.
I know that nothing would exist. The way I've heard it phrased is more like life as we know it wouldn't exist. Not that nothing wouldn't exist, but that life as we know it wouldn't exist, which is a very different scenario.
So you were coming in and out, kind of. I think I got some of it. So you're basically saying like there's
my internet sucks.
Yeah, it's all right. So basically, you're asking like, I guess I didn't get the question fully. I don't want to answer Paul's question.
That if you changed the gravitational pull, like you said, that wouldn't necessarily mean that there wouldn't be anything. It just means that there would be something different.
Well, it would be total chaos. I mean, it would be insane. Which I believe that God is literally holding our universe together. And every day when we wake up and get out of bed in the morning, whenever we get out of bed, I don't know what time zone you guys are in, but every day when I get out of bed, I'm thinking, I have faith that this Earth is not going to be hit by a meteor out of the thousands and thousands of meteors that have been in space. You would think that at some point, some meteor would hit us if evolution went through. Oh,
very
Can you hear me
It
now?
sounded like
Okay.
some sort of
I was just going to
robot.
say,
Insane
I
robot.
was just
Yeah.
going to say, at some point,
That was God.
yeah.
God
So,
stopped your microphone. He said, stop. Stop
yeah,
right
this
there.
happened on the last debate. I don't believe it's a coincidence, but it happened on my last debate. But, anyways, basically, all scientists agree, and I know we would agree on this, that the universe is indeed expanding, right? Well, they've concluded that if we go back in time, everything came back to a certain point, mathematically and logically to nothing. So people say, oh, there's no God. But here's the thing. If there is no God, then there's no logical explanation for how everything came into being. And somebody told me it's the argument from ignorance. Well, no, not really. It's called deductive reasoning if it's not a natural cause. Natural causes can't bring about themselves. It would have had to have been something outside of a natural cause, which again I think proves God.
Phrased the way that it is, yes, an argument. And I hate that word. I hate argumentum ad ignorantum, whatever. I hate that type of fallacy. I think it sounds awful. But yes, phrased that way, it is. If it's not this, then it must be this, or then it had to have been this. That's also a false dichotomy or a black and white fallacy, whatever you want to call it. Like I said, I am not a cosmologist. I'm not the person to be talking. There are loads and loads of people on the internet, on YouTube, who would do much better in this type of conversation. I'm not that person, but from what I do understand, that point of singularity, and singularity, I've been told, just means that I've heard of, just means like the laws that we apply normally break down. Right? That's just what a singularity is. And so it gets to this point, and it's not nothing. Like, that was everything. Everything was contained in that.
Well, you can't compress water. Yeah, that's the thing. You can't compress water. I mean, there are things that just fall apart. They say, oh, well, everything in the universe was in this little dot. There's no way.
Water
There's
didn't
only
exist
so much.
yet.
So, okay, but where did the water come from? You have to ask, where did these things come from to sustain life?
Well, on Earth, we understand. There are, for instance, there's research with this mineral called ringwoodite, which has it's not water. It's like it has a phase where it's like in the mantle, and it has not water, but I can't remember what it is. Maybe it's like, is it hydroxide, something like that? And it has that in it, and then when it melts, it's like the hydroxides mix or something like that. But there's also, you can get water on Earth from asteroids. I think that was previously the favorite hypothesis, was that water mostly came from asteroids crash into the early Earth.
Right. Well, I know we could go on for hours talking about this probably, but Shannon, I'm assuming, I know you probably got to get going. I got to get going pretty soon. Do you guys just want us to do a couple closing statements real quick and we'll wrap it up? It's up to you guys, whatever you want to do.
Yeah, that sounds good. Actually, we also had a couple of people in the chat that offered to come on with you sometime, Matt, if you're willing to come on again and talk about just the God
Absolutely.
subject.
Sure, absolutely. I'd love to.
Right. I'm sorry I wasn't much of a help in that area.
Oh, no, it's no problem, man. You know what? There's only so much we can do with so much time. I mean, obviously, it's limited time, but did you want to close out first, man? And
it doesn't matter to me either way.
Go ahead, man.
Okay. Well, I do think it was an interesting discussion. We didn't go through all the points that I wrote down from your other videos, all the sources I made. For instance, I never tackled the subject of using the rocks to date the fossils and fossils to date the rocks, because that doesn't happen. That's not how that works in geology or paleontology. It's just a complete misunderstanding of the process. And actually, I have a video on index fossils that shows kind of how we do part of that. They do it. But anyways, I guess finally is that there are good reasons. There are lots of good reasons, and we touched on a few to understand and accept evolution. And I don't think I've been shown today that evolution is a fraud. Maybe in the future I will be, but not today. I'm sticking with the science of evolutionary biology.
All right. All right, well, it was a great discussion. Really enjoyed talking to you. You all set, man? So, great discussion. Highly enjoyed it. I will say this. I believe that obviously the Bible is. I will say this: the Bible is my final authority, and I love the Word of God, and I believe it's very scientifically accurate. I know we didn't get into all that, but the Bible actually speaks of dinosaurs, speaks of Behemoth, Leviathan, before we even discovered these things, and that tells me that these people would have had to walk. The Bible talks about the dragons. I mean, it's mentioned many, many times in the Bible. So there are things that are in the Word of God that have been brought forth just to show that it's reliable, just to show. But, overall, I think that I highly recommend getting online and doing the research and looking at both secular sources and Christian sources and coming to a conclusion on your own. And folks, don't appeal to authority. Don't just say, oh, well, my group buddies are going to look at me kind of weird if I don't believe in evolution, and I'm finding this other information that defies it. If my friends think I'm crazy, then, they're going to think I'm crazy if I don't believe in it. Don't come at it with that approach. Look at the evidence and go to where it leads. And I just want to say thanks for having me on. Great discussion. Highly enjoyed it. If you guys ever like me, to come on again in the future, I'd be more than glad to. Thanks. Great. God bless.
Ditto goes for me.
Thank you both for coming on. It was a fun conversation.
Thank you,
chat, for doing what you do. Good night.